Oh, it's a job. It's not your family, honestly. And I think this is really interesting when you get into dynamics with workflow, right? You do get companies that say, "Oh, we're one big family," or "Welcome to the family of Megacorp," or "We're the family that lives and breathes our company's mission." And if you ask them what the company mission is, they don't know. It's kind of fun, but that makes it time to run away, whether it's parachuting out of a plane or what. You need to figure out what your next steps are going to be. Now, really, how this plays out is really absolutely dependent upon the company's culture. Right. There may be small businesses. It really truly is a family of mother, father, son, daughter, their families all working together. Then they really truly are a family and they really truly are that family's culture. But if you're working for a big company, you're working for a mega corp, you're working for somebody, no, it's really not a family. They may have some family values, but most of us consider our families dysfunctional. I know with my family, we went no contact with most of my family over time for various periods of times because it was really hard being connected to them for whatever reason. It's really hard for someone, especially in a minority, not to feel emotionally connected to their family members, whether you're the black sheep of the family, whether there's something else going on. This is just a reality. So if you try to take that dysfunctional family and put it into a work environment, your work environment is going to be dysfunctional, right? And that's really where it ends up. My work family ends up being messed up, and my managers may do more harm than good in this process, especially if they come off as paternalistic or they come off as like, well, I know better because I'm your manager. Now, family means different things to different people. I mean, for me, my family's just kind of weird and they've always been out there. And again, I did mention that I have gone no contact with my family at times. So you try to bring it back, and then I realized why I went no contact. Right now, there are some people that want that deeper connection with their coworkers, and I am not one of those people. Right, I don't ever want to become dependent on an organization. I have been in IT. I have lived through 5 different drawdowns. Right, I have mass firings at companies. I've been in companies where they have wiped out entire organizations. Right, so I don't want to become dependent upon an organization. I have learned over my time that if I have private details, it's really important that I keep my personal life separate from my work life. My work life is one thing and it is in a little box, and my personal life is something completely different. And I love what I do in my personal life. Now, when your workplace is your family, those lines become blurred. And if they become blurred, it can become really interesting, especially in this era of social media, where if you're sharing things on Facebook and that goes against your company's family beliefs, right? So say something weird happened or you found something really super cool and someone at work does not like that and they see that on your Facebook, all of a sudden their image of you changes. And then your family thing starts going to no place you want it to go. Now, there is kind of a plus side to this, right? There are some studies that show that the family metaphor can create a positive, motivating, and morale boosting culture if done right, where colleagues are no longer viewed as colleagues, but brothers and sisters. You can develop that strong emotional connection between employees and the organization. Now, the bad part, because again, families, 70 to 80% of us think our families are dysfunctional. Employees may feel compelled to share information with their superiors that they really shouldn't share. Right? We're not going to talk about our drug addiction. We're not going to talk about our alcohol use. We're not going to talk about I went home Friday and I drank all the way through to Monday morning. These are not things you say to your manager. So you have to learn how to draw those lines. You have to learn how to put some boundaries in here, right? And however, though, man, the quickest way to kill the family thing is through corporate gossip, intercompany gossip, water cooler gossip, whatever you want to call it. Man, I don't know how many times people have had their entire lives broken by this process. And it really kind of stinks, right? Because the quickest way to kill a family is to gossip. That's the last thing you want to do, right? So say I have cancer, I go to HR, I go with my boss and say, hey, this is why I'm going to have to take some absences, take some family leave. And then 24 hours later, the office is giving me a card and some flowers. Sorry, you have cancer. I never talked to the office. I never meant to talk to the office. I didn't want to bring my coworkers into my disease progression. So someone, boss or HR, talked about private medical information and now embarrassed the heck out of me because I really would not want that to ever happen. If I'm talking to you in private and I'm talking to you in confidence, take it like that. Don't just go share whatever we're saying with everybody in the office, right? That's not really family. That's really more gossipy. And that can just kill the office mood in a heartbeat. The other thing that's interesting too is remote work. You're seeing a whole lot of companies say, oh, come back to the office. You need to come back to the office now. Coming back to the office, yay, right? Now, it's a struggle if you don't see your employee hunched over their desk typing all day, right? You're like, start thinking, well, what if they're on their phone? What if they're drinking coffee? What if they're getting up and moving around? What if they have, they're tied to their health, so they get up and they do their 250 steps an hour, right? Managers are going to seek out more information about what you're doing, right? And this becomes a real problem for micromanagers. Micromanagers want to be able to control every minute that you work for them. And sometimes more than just every minute you work for them. And it really kills them. It really drives them crazy, not having visibility into you all the time. So if you're starting to get spyware on your box, where they want to monitor everything you do, well, let's say you're on Teams and your Teams goes inactive for 5 minutes because you went to the bathroom. And when you come back, your manager reaches out to you and says, why was your Teams inactive for 5 minutes? There's a reason why everybody will tell you how to put your Microsoft Teams so that it never goes inactive. And that's because of that kind of relationship. And that starts to dig at that process of trust, right? If my manager can't trust me to do my job and take a break when I need to take a break, then we end up starting getting to that real resentful part of my dysfunctional family. And you put a high output or a high outcome employer into this mix, right? Where they want to know what you're doing. How many lines of code did you write? How many pieces of product did you put out? What did you do with this? How many dictation and blahs? They're going to feel entitled to knowledge specific to their employees. Like, how much did you have for lunch? Why did you get up? Why did you go inactive? Why did this happen? Why weren't you at your computer 100% of the time? It's going to happen. And when you get into that and said, but we're a family, families don't monitor people like that all the time. And it starts killing the vibe, right? No one wants that. Then you add in some loyalty, right? We want, honestly, in our hearts to believe that the company has everyone's best interests at heart, that we're here to serve our customers, we're here to make our product, we're here to do cool things, we're here to do whatever it is we're here to do. And we're loyal to those ideas. We joined this company because we liked something about this company, right? But when you add in the family, you add in those family dynamics, you might cover up for Joe Bob having a couple of whiskeys at lunch. You might see something unethical happen. You may see someone get harassed or sexually harassed, or you may see something else go on. And to keep your job, you won't say anything because you're family. And that loyalty absolutely 100% of the time will be exploited by someone in the food chain, right? And now, it's not just seeing something, but it's that idea of, extra hours, right? Work extra hours or work on projects that you just don't really have a comfort for or just outside your job role, right? And then keeping this under wraps because it's in the family's best interest. So again, it's kind of that interesting part, and you hear about, quiet quitting and rage applying and blah, 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 not putting out more than you want to. And that's because we're seeing that our loyalty cannot be rewarded and won't be rewarded, especially when the manager's playing on the idea of loyalty and family. Obviously, play your part in this because we're all in this together. We're a family. You want to be part of the family, right? They will absolutely play on that emotion. They will absolutely try to manipulate you. They will absolutely use your loyalty to the company to put in 60, 80, 90, 120 hours worth of work, especially if you're salaried and you're only salaried for 40. They absolutely will do these things. It's not an uncommon thing. It's not to be unexpected, but employees are exploited as a result of this kind of power dynamic. And that's the tragedy of the whole family thing. Family, in a lot of ways, can actually be really useful in pulling people together and building a team. But if you have a manager in there that's willing to exploit that power dynamic, then we start getting into a few other things that end up happening, right? And we end up into some really problems with our relationships. And it becomes a stressor in our life, right? It's not uncommon. I have relationships with my parents, my siblings, the rest of my family. Again, gone no contact. And if allowed, these relationships and these emotions and the coping mechanisms that I've developed can spill over into my professional relationships as well. My biggest coping mechanism is to walk away from situations that are like this, just because I need to have the time to get my head together. I need to understand what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it. I am very much so a cognitive behavioralist in that I think and then my behaviors. And I have to have that. When my employer jams me into a corner, I feel really unempowered by those family dynamics. Right? I can't make my own decisions. I'm being forced to go along with what my boss wants, even if I think it's wrong. It takes me outside my comfort zone, and I may end up doing something that is not good for me, is not good for my manager, is not good for my team, is not good for my company, more than once. So those predetermined dynamics and personalities will take over rather than performing the job well. I get stuck in this emotional loop. And we do get stuck in these emotional loops. And these emotional loops can have some really serious damage when it comes to how we interrelate with people. The other thing that makes it really difficult now, especially in this modern age, is that families don't fire. Right? We have gone through wave after wave after wave of mass layoffs in the last decade. It's like no industry has been spared. Employers just jettisoning their employees. So family cultures are always going to be personal, whether you want it to be or not. Families don't fire junior, right? They don't undergo performance improvement plans. If you're going to sell family, you have to sell the family dynamic, and you have to sell that process of here's how families support each other. And it's not going to be through being fired, and it's not going to be through performance improvement plans. So how are you going to manage this, right? At some point in this process, in the relationship, you're seeing this idea of indefinite bond when the relationship is compared to a family. I will always be part of your family, right? Now, the only place I feel about anything like that is Navy. I was in the Navy. I love the Navy. I did amazingly cool things in the Navy, and I will always cherish that time. The Navy as a concept feels like my family. But then I had managers in the Navy, one that chased me around a comm center with a crowbar, others that tried to get me to change something about how they're interacting with family dynamics because of where my wife worked. So there were things inside that Navy family that were really interestingly manipulative around the process. But in the overall viewpoint, the Navy was my family. I had a good time. But I did have some bosses that engaged in those behaviors that we just didn't want to have covering up for our family values, right? So I can have a close-knit coworker, and I did, because he was out there having an affair, and it was risking hiding that illicit behavior, right? In the Navy, having an affair is generally a bad thing. There's actually a whole article about that. You definitely don't want to get involved. But with my wife, who worked at a family service center, and worked in the psychology department there at the time. So my boss was seeing the doctor that my wife worked for. And he used me to try to get to my wife to change the doctor's viewpoint so that he wouldn't get articled, right? He wouldn't get captain's mast. So researchers have found that in that familial culture, we will fail to report wrongdoing. And I didn't say anything. I just had my supervisor at the time putting pressure on me to get to my wife, to get to the doctor, to get from getting in trouble. So I didn't report it. Of course not. I didn't even know what was really going on in my head. So I remained silent and complicit, right? Because I didn't know what they would do. They outranked me. Dude, they outranked me huge. I could have gotten into a lot of trouble. And it ended up being a huge disaster towards the end because he decided he wanted to write me up for not going to an event, a family event. Sponsored by him. And we didn't want to go because if my wife saw him with the person he was having the affair with, she would have to report that to the doctor. So we didn't go. And his goal on this one was, I'm going to get him into shape. I'll write him up for this. And it ended up talking before a combined chiefs group, trying to keep me in line so that I wouldn't say anything. And it ended up being a more positive experience. But in that moment of time, it was just better for me to remain silent. I wasn't going to win anything here. And it was just really kind of interesting, right? So what to do? Here's some concrete steps you can do. The goal here is that you're not a manager and that you don't derive the overall company culture. None of this comes from you. But you're really not buying the family culture and has become a huge problem. Now, you can do some things to turn it on its head so you can alter some of that negative trajectory while you're still trying to build out your bailout plan because of this kind of culture. And it can really kind of help you out on this one. And what you want to do is you want to flip it on its head. families and teams. And in all honesty, you really want to start trying to use more team language. Well, we're a family. No, we're a team. We're a team that's all going to try to do what we need to do. Now, in sports, man, I'll tell you what, you talk to professional football players, basketball players, not everyone likes each other. And at times they're barely going to respect each other because that person blew the big kick or the big basketball thing or whatever, right? But they pull together for the goal. So in your interactions with others, start using team language rather than family language. It will make a huge difference. We're not a team, or we're not a family, we are a team with a goal. And then start setting little minor boundaries, right? Little minor ones, right? Over time. And then add clearer, firmer boundaries while trying to alter the culture from inside. You can do more from the inside of a company than you can do from outside. But again, the idea is start small. And while you're working on your bailout plan, to kind of help spit this out, try to make it more like a sports team. The more you can do that with, you can help define a purpose, right? You can keep your conversations with managers and employees around performance and focus on goals. So like, hey, I noticed that we were 25 product units short last week, right? So how do we want to focus on this? How do we want to get this thing fixed? How do we want a goal on this one? Do we need to drop our goal back by 25? Right? If someone tries to drag you off on a tangent, like, well, what did you do this weekend? Was it fun? Do anything exciting? You can keep it generic, non-committal towards work and others. Yeah, hey, I went fishing. Oh, where'd you go fishing? I have this little fishing hole that I really need to keep quiet because this is my fishing hole. Oh, okay. I went hiking. I went camping. I just hung out and played video games. Helped my kid with homework. Again, non-committal things. Things that are absolutely average, things that people do all the time on their own that don't start making it look like you've got a problem. You don't want to say, oh, I had this terrible fight with my spouse this weekend. Oh, I got into a car wreck. Oh, my engine head gasket blew because I was revving my Dodge Charger too much, right? Again, it's kind of those things. Keep it small, keep it non-committal, keep it focused on goals. Right? If you're in a one-on-one and the lines begin to blur, well, what did you do? How are you getting along with your wife? How are you getting along with your kids? How are you getting along with your dog? And if those lines begin to blur, try to bring the focus back on work. You know, it's more interesting when you ask your boss, what are this week's team goals? So your boss is going to go like, well, how are you doing with your family? I'm like, well, okay, we're doing fine, but what do we really want to try to accomplish this week on our team goals, right? And how do you want them accomplished? And all of a sudden your boss has to flip back into that, okay, goals, accomplishment. Oh, wow, I get to tell this person how to do something. You may not care what they're going to tell you, but the focus, own the focus, own that focus. Because remember, they're going to try to emotionally get you to get involved with them. So your boss may come up and say, oh, I heard you had this really big fight with your wife this weekend. And you can just turn around and say, wow, where'd you hear that? Get them to own that maybe they were making stuff up along the way, right? Don't ever admit to anything at all in this process. Define that purpose, own it, keep it focused. The other thing you can do too is that if you come at it from the mindset of any relationship is temporary, you actually own a lot of the control of the process. So if you think about work's a lot like dating, right? It's not going to work out all the time. Sometimes you'll have a great date. Sometimes you'll have this horrible date and you're going to quit early, right? There are some things in common, but it's not enough to keep you engaged. Organizations are going to grow and change. You get new managers, new management in, new senior management. You get a change in product, industry, market, direction, strategy. And you need to either adapt or leave, right? It's that simple. And your boss needs to do the same, right? So while family ties can be binding, it's really the rare case where you're going to keep your work friends and your work family after you have left. And that's really the big key on this one, right? Is that these are really temporary situations. Your manager is your manager, but not for life. Your work family is your work family, but not for life. These are people that you know only for a short period of time. You won't keep these people in your lifestyle for forever. So understand that relationship is temporary. If you know the relationship is temporary and you can control the process through team and you can control the emotional response through being self-regulated, you actually can turn this on its head and have a little bit more power over how the situation goes. Now, remember, if your boss is really truly malignant, they're going to try to get you on emotional hooks. And we'll meet and talk about those as we kind of go through the process of this course. So we'll learn about emotional regulation and all the rest of it. But that whole idea of family is something that you can really more or less focus on. So just keep focused, right? If the family concept is burning you out, if you find yourself having, moral or ethical issues, it's time to go, right? It just time to go. It's time to work on that exit plan. Start working on side gigs. Start working on improving yourself. Take courses, do small trainings, get certificates, whatever you need to do for whatever industry you want to go into. And it's sort of like with me, right? I mean, I've seen and done a lot of really cool things, but I also really like the independence now that I've got because I've made so many investments into what I do and my education, my training, my skills, the work I do, and the work I love to do. Right. So I keep my language focused on the team and I use team based language to make sure we've got all the process. Now you can try to manage your boss. Right. And again, the big thing though is that they're probably going to get annoyed with you if you keep on repeating back everything they said to you just to make sure you comprehended it. So don't do that. Just keep it going. Turn anything back to them. Make sure you understood. That's okay to a certain point, but manage your boss, especially through language, especially through focus, especially through keeping them out of that work process. Don't ever tell them anything negative. Make sure there's nothing to gossip about. The other thing too is document. Man, documentation can absolutely save everything about you. Because if you have a bad manager, odds are highly likely they're a bad manager for everyone, right? So if you can document time, place, and event, then you can keep on proving your point. Keep a track of issues, especially when private things go public. And it's more than once you'll see a bad manager suddenly dragged out of the organization and put on blast on social media and torn apart. And you have that data. It's not uncommon for labor relations boards to come into a company and go, what's going on here? Right? These are not uncommon things, especially among blue collar workers and anything else. There's a lot of power dynamics going on here. The more documentation you have, the better off you are. And again, even if it's just names, dates, place, time, when the event, just that's all you have to do, right? I always walk around with my cell phone now, and I'll take notes. Depending on where you are legally, it can be if you need to record something, there's actually software that you can use on your lock screen that will record things. If you're in a Teams meeting and you don't want to have something known that you're recording it, you can actually go through, and if you're on a Macintosh, you can use screen capture. If you're on a Windows box, you have to buy some software like Camtasia. You can do all that stuff. And just keep documentation of all these things, especially if they're starting to get into some ethical gray and moral areas that are making you really uncomfortable or could be illegal. So yeah, no, they're not your family. This is a temporary work family that is going to do whatever they need to do to accomplish whatever goals they need to accomplish. And you can control this a little by managing your manager. Make sure that you're keeping track of everything. Use inclusive team language rather than family language, and work on your bailout plan.